5 years ago, my 13-year-old daughter's pregnancy was discovered, and right before my eyes, my husband and daughter committed suicide together. Until then, we had a happy life. My marriage was solid, and we had a lovely daughter. Everything seemed perfect. The only blemish on my life was my brother-in-law, Dan, who would barge into our house and make a mess drinking.
"Mom, what should I do? I think I'm pregnant."
With those words from my daughter, our life was turned upside down.
"I heard about it. What have you done? The whole neighborhood is talking. It's made things awkward for me and my parents. It's because you, her mother, didn't educate her properly. That's why this happened."
Dan, acting as if he owned the place, yelled and screamed. My husband, daughter, and I were all worn out, and eventually, what we feared would happen did happen.
"What are you doing? Stop them quickly."
My husband and daughter's car plummeted off a cliff. They were gone, out of reach.
"It's your fault. Why weren't you watching them? Give me back my brother and niece."
To think you'd abandon your husband and daughter, you're incredibly cold-hearted. Broken by the accusations, I was forced to live like a slave to my in-laws and Dan. 5 years later. After finding my husband's will, I decided to seek revenge. I would make sure they paid for what they had done. My husband also loved to drink. You brothers used to drink together often, didn't you?
"Yes, that's right. It was the greatest pleasure of my life. But it's impossible now, thanks to you."
Then, suddenly, my husband and daughter appeared on the balcony and began to reveal a shocking truth. I'm Ava, a 40-year-old. I live with my husband, Chris, and our daughter, Emily, making us a family of 3. Emily is reaching that costly age of 13, so I've taken a part-time office job to help out, though my earnings are just a drop in the bucket, and we mainly rely on Chris's income. Emily and I get along great, and she even comes to me with her problems. Chris and I have a strong marriage too. He has a bit of a problem with drinking. He gets loud and loses himself in it, but it's never been enough to make me lose affection for him, just something that occasionally frustrates me. I do what I can for our family, and Chris works hard every day. Emily is diligent with her studies and extracurricular activities and is well regarded at school. Though there are minor annoyances in daily life, I believed we could face anything as a family. That was until that incident occurred. I couldn't have imagined my life, my family, being thrown into such disarray. It was around the time I heard that Dan, Chris's brother, had gotten divorced that he started showing up at our house all the time. I wasn't told why he got divorced, but given his arrogant and rough demeanor, it seemed like a natural outcome. Dan always brought alcohol with him, knowing Chris, who's timid and also enjoys his drink, couldn't turn him away. Every time Dan came without notice, I prepared snacks for both of them and took care of my husband, who laughed loudly, and his brother, whose behavior was overbearing whether he had drunk or not. I have to work tomorrow. This isn't relaxing at all. Watching my husband and Dan drink and have a good time together, completely disregarding how I felt, deeply disappointed me. They both act so similarly when drunk, which only adds to my fatigue. Hey, honey, about your brother. Could he maybe visit a bit less? It's hard for me when he comes over on weekdays or Sundays since I have work the next day. Yeah. You're right. I do feel bad about it, but I just can't seem to say no. I think he's just lonely. When my husband, who usually considers my feelings first, said that, I felt unable to say anything more. I often sighed, wondering how long this way of living would last.
Hey, we're out of snacks. What a thoughtless wife. Bring some more.
I wanted to scream, I'm not your wife, but I restrained myself and brought some simple snacks. My husband gave me an apologetic look but never cautioned Dan. But I supposed it was inevitable. My in-laws have always clearly favored Dan over Chris, spoiling him. It seems to be some form of brainwashing, given their family history, so it's no surprise Chris can't stand up to Dan. I told myself to be patient, to endure. Dan's overbearing and aggressive nature led me to instruct Emily to stay in her room whenever he visited. She seems to dislike Dan too, hiding in her room whenever he's around.
Emily isn't coming out? She has a relative over, and she's being so rude. Doesn't she have any manners? Weren't you supposed to teach her better?
Even when my daughter was insulted, my husband and I just gave a vague smile and let it slide. It's better than letting our precious daughter meet this man.
You're my brother, but you have no eye for women. What do you see in such a plain and inattentive woman? A man should marry a more beautiful and attentive woman. Come on, Dan. Let's just drink the alcohol you brought. Running away to alcohol again. That's another one of your flaws. Maybe so.
My husband, who loves to drink, seemed less and less inclined to drink with his brother, and with each passing occasion, he became less intoxicated than usual. Seeing us treated this way, my daughter would sometimes help with chores the next day, as if to comfort us. Despite enduring such unbearable treatment, we couldn't resist. Feeling pathetic for making my daughter worry, I thought of cutting ties with them someday. The problem was my husband's feelings. Having been oppressed and brainwashed from a young age, he seemed unable to make the decision to cut ties with his family. My parents died early, and I have no siblings, so I can't understand his feelings. Therefore, until my husband's resolve is firm, we decided as a family to endure quietly. One day, out of the blue, a new troublemaker appeared in our lives, aside from my brother-in-law.
Mom, what should I do? I think I'm pregnant.
At first, I didn't understand what was being said. Gradually, as I comprehended the meaning, I nearly raised my voice in agitation, but the anxious look on my daughter's face helped me hold back.
Is that true?
Yes. I took a test. My daughter looked like she was on the verge of tears. I gently patted her shoulder, trying to soothe her.
Just to be sure, let's test again. I'll go buy a test.
Ultimately, my daughter's pregnancy was confirmed. No matter how we asked who the father was, my daughter firmly kept her lips sealed. Whether I asked, or my husband did, it was the same. After hours of family discussion, we came to a conclusion. Taking into account my daughter's opinion, I believe we were able to reach a consensus that satisfied everyone. It was a relief to have discovered my daughter's pregnancy early. This way, we could still manage the situation. But just when we had found some peace, hearing the news, my brother-in-law barged into our house and began to berate us.
I heard about it. What have you done? The whole neighborhood is talking. It's made things awkward for me and my parents. It's because you, her mother, didn't educate her properly. That's why this happened. Please stop yelling. My daughter is frightened.
Seeing me finally retort, my brother-in-law smirked as if he found me ridiculous.
Playing the mother now? It's all too late.
After causing a commotion, my brother-in-law left the house. The next day, a call came from my in-laws, who showered my husband with similar reproaches. Even as we tried to navigate this crisis, it felt like those around us were dragging us down. To mask my anxiety, I held my daughter tightly. With my husband busy at work, the responsibility of caring for our daughter fell primarily on me. If there was time, my husband came with us, but essentially, I was the one handling everything.
Oh, someone's calling me. Go ahead without me.
On our way back from the hospital as a family of 3, I received a call from my daughter's teacher. It was a call to inquire about my daughter's well-being, but given the complex situation, it inevitably turned into a lengthy conversation.
What are you doing? Stop them quickly.
I was startled when my brother-in-law appeared as I was heading back to the car after the call. Confused by his shouting, I looked in the direction he pointed. My husband's car was driving straight toward a cliff.
Stop! Please stop!
My frantic screams were futile, the car didn't stop. Trying to catch up on foot was hopeless, the car crossed the fence much quicker.
Oh!
As if mocking my desperate reach, the car slipped down the cliff. Rushing to follow, I was restrained by hospital staff.
Calm down, please! Someone, call the rescue team and the police.
As I broke down crying, my brother-in-law glared at my back.
It's your fault. Why weren't you watching them? Give me back my brother and niece.
Even though I had always gritted my teeth and endured, now his voice pierced through my heart. The stares and voices of my in-laws also disturbed the calm of my heart.
What kind of person are you? To think you'd abandon your husband and daughter, you're incredibly cold-hearted.
With Chris and Emily gone, I lost the pillars of my heart. Moreover, being berated in such a manner made me indifferent towards life, and for the next 5 years, I lived as if a slave, toiling away at the behest of these people. After 5 years, I was utterly exhausted.
Why did you leave me alone?
The marriage ring, now loose due to my weight loss, slipped through my fingers as I fiddled with it. I had been told by my in-laws and Dan to sell the house, but I desperately refused because it held precious family memories. Now, this house was my only sanctuary. Especially in the bedroom I shared with Chris, I could almost remember how to breathe.
Hey, Ava. How long are you gonna rest? Come over quickly and start cooking.
Yes. I replied to my mother-in-law shouting and stood up. Then, the ring slipped from my hand and rolled under the bed. Oh no. Crawling under the bed to retrieve it, I noticed something unusual. What's this? There was something stuck to the edge of the bed. I picked up the ring and reached for the curious object. It was an envelope and a sound recorder.
What is this?
Feeling a stir in my heart, I turned on the recorder. Covered in dust, it was still functional. I could listen to the content clearly.
Thank you, my dear.
Tears flowed as I heard Chris's voice for the first time in 5 years. And then, I made up my mind. I could no longer live my life in tears. I must live looking forward. And for that, I needed exact revenge. I would make sure they paid for what they had done. Thus, I began investigating Dan's daily behavior. I looked into his conduct and work situation at the company and even talked to his ex-wife. Dan has a daughter, and it appears that the mother has custody. Despite his repeated requests to see his daughter, the ex-wife continues to ignore him. Moreover, it seemed he was frequently causing trouble at work, both through his arrogant attitude and his attempts to flirt with female employees. My desire for revenge wasn't directed solely at Dan, but also at my in-laws. I methodically gathered evidence and prepared for my revenge. A month later, as usual, I was called to my in-laws' house and was preparing dinner.
You never improve in cooking. The taste is too strong. Are you trying to kill us? A woman like you should be grateful you're still connected to our family. Otherwise, you'd be homeless by now. Know your place. What's with that face? Can't you be a bit more pleasant?
I'm sorry. I'll bring the alcohol now. While being berated, I continued to move mechanically as instructed.
Absolutely charmless.
While still complaining about me, Dan drank from the glass of alcohol.
Don't let the glass go empty.
As instructed, I poured more alcohol. Next to Dan, as he drank his second glass, I muttered.
My husband also loved to drink. You brothers used to drink together often, didn't you?
The gaze of my in-laws sharpened, and Dan glared at me.
Yes, that's right. It was the greatest pleasure of my life. But it's impossible now, thanks to you.
Dan splashed the remaining alcohol in his glass onto me. The sharp smell was unpleasant, but his reaction was exactly what I had anticipated.
No, it's okay. My husband is here today. What did you say?
Shadows appeared on the balcony. One seemed to belong to an adult male, and the other, to a child about junior high school age.
What is this? What kind of joke is this?
I didn't respond to Dan's scream. My in-laws were flustered too, but they didn't seem as terrified as Dan. Then, the voice of my husband could be heard.
I was probably gonna be silenced by my brother.
My in-laws gasped, their eyes darting back and forth in shock. Dan's face turned pale for a moment, then he raised his voice as if to drown out my husband's.
Hey! What is the meaning of this? There's a limit to joking around.
My husband continued to speak, holding hands with our daughter.
I found out why my brother got divorced. I heard it was because he made advances towards his own daughter. After persistently asking my daughter, it became clear that he had made a move on her after I had fallen asleep during his visit. That's nonsense. Do you think you can get away with something like this?
Dan lunged at me, so I fled to a corner of the room. His gaze darted all over, and an abnormal sweat gleamed on his forehead. His eyes were bloodshot, clearly showing his agitation.
My daughter is afraid to go to the police. From my behavior, my brother must have realized that I knew the truth. Sometimes he glares at me with a terribly frightening look. Stop it. Where is this coming from? Enough is enough.
Dan's breathing quickly became more labored, and his complexion turned a dark red. Bloodshot eyes frantically scanned the surroundings. He was clearly in a panic. It was evident to anyone that he was guilty of something. I looked at the man before me with cold eyes.
What's the matter? It's the voice of your beloved brother. It's been a while since you've heard it. Don't you feel nostalgic?
Dan glared at me. But his legs seemed to have frozen, unable to move.
What are you doing? Do you think you'll be forgiven?
That's my line. Dan was panicking. The man who had berated me for 5 years was now pale, which I found satisfying. Yet, it wasn't enough. I need him to be more flustered. My anger won't subside otherwise.
I persuaded my reluctant daughter to undergo prenatal DNA testing. The results are hidden in my room. I plan to go to the police, but it might be too late.
Finally, Dan let out an indescribable scream. He rushed to the balcony and banged on the window glass repeatedly. His mother, apparently panicked by his behavior, cautiously called out to him. She was probably worried the glass would break.
Dan, what's wrong? Calm down. Shut up. Stay back. Ouch!
My mother-in-law was pushed by the frenzied Dan and fell on her buttocks. My father-in-law rushed to help her up, but both seemed to be too scared to do anything but stare at Dan's drastic change.
Stop! What's the use of doing such things now? It's all in vain.
Then, stepping out onto the balcony, seeing the figures beyond the railing made him go weak at the knees.
How?
His pale, frightened figure was almost comical. Dan, still seated on the floor, entered the room and continued to stare at the figures that appeared on the balcony.
How is this? Why are they alive?
Aren't you happy? Hearing my voice, he turned his head towards me. Even though he glared at me, I wasn't scared at all now.
What are you talking about? What does this mean? What is this voice? It's your doing, isn't it?
And what do you mean by what's the use of doing such things now?
Do you have any idea what Chris was talking about?
Dan was at a loss for words. After his gaze wandered for a while, he suddenly stood up with shaky legs and shouted.
It's a false accusation. I don't know what you're talking about.
My in-laws, who hadn't grasped the situation, snapped back to reality at his shout. They glared at me and raised their voices.
That's a bad joke. What do you think of your husband and daughter?
Realizing his parents were on his side seemed to calm him down a bit. Dan seemed a bit more composed now and walked towards me.
Yes, that's right. And what about those shadows anyway? You staged this, didn't you?
How could I? Maybe your brother and niece came out because they resent you? Besides, how do you prepare the voice of someone who has been dead for 5 years? He let out a weird scream. He sat down and covered his head with his hands. It was as if what he had done in the past was already clear. Yet, my in-laws seemed unwilling to give up.
This is a miscarriage of justice. There are things you should and shouldn't say. That's right. My son would never do such a thing.
How blissfully ignorant they are, even in this situation. But it seemed to have rallied Dan. With a sudden idea, he, still crouched down, pointed at me with a slight smile. Has he lost his nerve? How pitiful.
That's right. It must be projection mapping.
Oh, you figured it out, did you? Indeed, the shadows of my husband and daughter were created using projection mapping. While my in-laws and Dan were away, I had prepared a transparent screen on the balcony for the projection. A small projector was placed in the yard, projecting the figures from there. At night, neither the screen nor the projector would be noticed. Dan, not amused that I had admitted it so easily, turned red and spit in anger.
Resorting to petty tricks. You want to harass me that much? I could sue you for this.
Please do.
I was thinking of suing you as well. What did you say?
What I presented was the prenatal DNA test results my husband had left behind. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Dan's complexion turned a deep red again.
Give that to me.
Seeing him lunge at me, my in-laws screamed. Even for those who blindly sided with the eldest son, this behavior seemed frightening indeed.
This. If only this didn't exist. A mere piece of paper can't do anything.
He snatched the document from me and tore it to pieces. Then, as if relieved, he began to laugh loudly.
This thing. It's obviously a lie.
It's useless.
Everything is useless.
His blatant fear was as good as a confession. Moreover, tearing the paper without even re-examining its content was like a second confession. The belief that what was in front of him was real also betrayed a lack of composure.
The useless one here is you. Did you really think I'd bring the original here? The real document is safely stored away. What?
Dan ground his teeth and glared at me. Then the room's door opened.
You really don't know when to give up.
It's over for you.
Just accept it.
Dan turned pale as he glared towards the source of the voice.
I called her.
She was happy to help. She was Dan's ex-wife, Sarah Matthews. When investigating him, I had reached out to her, and she willingly agreed to assist in my revenge.
When you and I divorced, all we could do was run away. But now that I know the situation, I can't stay silent. I'll fully disclose the reason for our divorce. I've also got our daughter's consent. That's not the deal. We agreed you wouldn't sue if I agreed to the divorce. I'm not the one suing. I'm just gonna share your past actions as testimony when Ava sues.
Hearing Sarah's words, he screamed, spitting in anger.
Traitor! What a shameless woman! What are you all talking about, ganging up on our Dan like this?
Despite being confronted by two men, Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head, looking down on them with a sneer.
Don't you understand even in this situation? Or are you just pretending not to know? It's appalling. How dare you? Don't you have any respect for your elders?
Hiding behind her husband, my mother-in-law snapped at Sarah.
I've never liked you from the start. You're insolent and talk back. I never invited you into this house. Leave at once.
Receiving my in-laws' words, Sarah showed a face filled with utter disdain.
So, you took advantage of Ava because she wouldn't talk back? You made her work for your convenience? You're despicable.
It seemed to hit the mark. My mother-in-law's cheeks flushed.
You have no right to criticize after you left so quickly. How infuriating. Conspiring with another worthless daughter-in-law to harass us like this. Why should we have to suffer like this?
Their lack of self-awareness was astounding. After treating me like a slave and pushing me this far. If they hadn't discriminated against their own child, perhaps my husband might not have ended up like this.
Maybe it's because you spoiled your first son too much? Your beloved eldest son is now officially a criminal. Maybe you should reflect on the disgrace within your own family before you berate your daughter-in-law. Your victim mentality is quite remarkable at this point.
Dan's complexion changed. Being insulted by his ex-wife seemed to be too much for his pride. Despite everything being too late, he desperately furrowed his brows and glared at us threateningly.
A criminal, me? Don't be ridiculous. You might be aware, she was a child. It's considered a crime. Evidence, It's just that piece of paper you have, isn't it? As if I'd be arrested because of something like that.
His excuses were pitiful. I was utterly astounded. Sarah was just as incredulous as I was.
To tear up that piece of paper without even checking its contents, and then to still claim it as evidence.
Sarah let out a long sigh. I wanted to sigh too, but if that's what he wished, let me invite another guest.
It seems Dan is still not ready to admit his guilt. Since he seems to have forgotten what happened 5 years ago, how about we discuss something more recent? What?
The next guest I had called was Ryan West, one of Dan's subordinates. He's a reliable man who also helped with the projection mapping on the balcony.
I've been assisting Ava, so I thought I'd take this opportunity to greet you. After all I've done for you, you forget your gratitude.
Done for me?
Being blamed for failures, having my credit stolen, driving colleagues to resign, there are plenty of bad memories, but I don't recall any where you taught me. What?
Dan didn't seem to be able to stand up. He truly seemed to have lost his nerve. It's pitiful, but after being oppressed for so long, seeing him in this state is somewhat satisfying.
Manager's work attitude has been problematic for a while now. Your arrogant behavior and treatment of female employees have been causing headaches for everyone. Some of us, including myself, have already submitted recordings of the treatment we received from you to HR. You're definitely getting fired. What did you say? How are we supposed to live then?
Hearing that their pride and joy was gonna be fired, their first concern was their own livelihood. How shallow can they be? I was at a loss for words in dismay. Sarah seemed to share my sentiment, and we exchanged looks. Ryan, although probably feeling the same, remained smiling as he dealt with my mother-in-law.
It would be nice if you could live on your pension. You think this is someone else's problem? You want to ruin us?
My father-in-law confronted Ryan. They probably thought he was intimidating them because he was still smiling, unlike us.
No, I don't think that at all. However, apart from the firing, we're also preparing for a lawsuit. Former manager, I should say. Including him, I can't exactly predict what your livelihood will look like. A lawsuit? Why would it come to that?
Dan was completely flustered, unable to keep up with the conversation. My in-laws were the only ones panicking. It felt good, but I felt sorry for Ryan being cornered like this.
Padding of the subcontractor fees has been discovered. It appears you were conspiring with the subcontractor's representative, but they've confessed, and the former manager's name has come up, so we're currently preparing for that. The police will be arriving shortly, so please prepare yourselves mentally.
My in-laws seemed to have lost their ability to speak. I observed the hateful trio's faces turn pale. After having my fill of their dismay, I decided to deliver the final blow.
This is the recorder containing my husband's will. The voice of my husband that played earlier was from this recorder. The data has already been saved elsewhere, so I decided to use this. For a month, I've been recording everything you've done to me. What are you saying, Ava? Don't suddenly start calling me by my name now. After all, you've been calling me hey, you, that one, haven't you?
The treatment I received from my in-laws and Dan was of a level that broke the law. After recording everything for a month, my lawyer confirmed it was enough to press charges.
I'm also ready to sue. This is a memento from my husband, and I thought I'd use it to move forward with my life. It's been very useful. It felt like my husband was helping me. He too received terrible treatment from you, so maybe this will give him some peace. To treat your own family like this, I can't believe it. After giving a place to someone with nowhere to go, you repay kindness with betrayal. Is it fun for you to hurt people? You're sick. That's not human behavior. I'll return those words right back to you.
They're facing ruin next anyway. If I don't pay them back for everything, I can't move forward.
I do love my husband, but I have no desire to remain relatives with you. I'll be severing our ties. Such a thing. That's impossible.
No.
I've already filed the paperwork. With my husband's passing, I can officially withdraw any relation to you based on my own will.
My in-laws were saying something, but whether they were too confused or too emotional, their words were unintelligible. They just seemed to be red in the face and spitting.
Please don't rely on me no matter how much trouble you're in the future. I have never and will never rely on you. We are now strangers to each other.
My in-laws shouted something. Their words weren't clear, but I managed to catch their final retort.
This is on you. Never show your face to us again.
Happy to comply. All preparations were done. The prenatal DNA test results and the original of my husband's will have been submitted to the police, and Sarah has already given her testimony. Saying to them as if preparations were yet to be made was simply to wait for them to dig their own grave. As expected, Dan staggered towards us. We ignored him and walked towards the front door.
Don't think you can get away with this. I'll make you suffer.
As we left through the front door, he caught up and lunged at us with a fearsome look. But this was precisely the scenario I wanted.
Stop right there!
The police, responding to the call, arrived and grabbed his arm. He had just compounded his crimes. Really, simple people are so easy to handle.
As you've witnessed, I was just threatened.
The police nodded, and Dan, now restrained, yelled out. His voice was hardly coherent. To exhibit such disgrace in front of the police. Nothing but careless.
He's finished, isn't he?
Sarah whispered with a laugh, and I couldn't help but join in. It seemed she too had her share of troubles with him. Now happily remarried to a wonderful man, Sarah later shared with a smile that she finally felt she could move on in a real sense. Afterward, Dan was fired from his company and is currently under prosecution. It seems he's been sued for embezzlement damages so extensive he could never repay them in a lifetime. With rumors spreading and his face appearing in newspapers, it's unlikely he'll ever be able to secure a respectable job again. My in-laws also seem to be feeling the squeeze as rumors spread through the neighborhood. Despite receiving numerous apology letters from my in-laws, whose relationship with the neighborhood worsened after Dan's arrest, I've been ignoring them all. Threatening them with legal action if they persisted in bothering me finally made them back off. His parents, who once doted on their son, now curse him daily. Thanks to Sarah's introduction, I secured a position at one of her relatives' companies. With this, I should be able to start my true second life. Although I've been mourning and grieving until now, being able to retaliate, albeit belatedly, for my husband and daughter has gradually made me more positive. 3 years later.
Ava, would you like to go see a movie this Saturday?
Oh, that sounds lovely.
What kind of movie is it?
I've started dating Ryan, who used to work under my brother-in-law.
It's a movie I think you'd like.
Did you see the commercial for it yesterday?
I wanted to see that. Thank you, Ryan.
While I still love my husband, frequent communication with Ryan after that incident led to our relationship. I was genuinely surprised when he, 5 years my junior, confessed his feelings, but I learned he too had lost his wife early. As two people left behind, we've been spending our time together leisurely.
Hello, Ava, Ryan.
Oh, are you two on a date? Did we interrupt? I heard a voice from the entrance. Then, I stood up to greet the two of them.
Welcome, Rhea, Sarah. Don't tease us. We have cake, so let's all enjoy it together.
At Ryan's words, Rhea jumped up in joy.
I'm so happy. Thank you, Ryan.
I still keep in touch with Sarah and her daughter, Rhea. The people around me have been very kind, especially since I lost my daughter. Rhea is very close to me, and sometimes, when I think about how my daughter might have grown up like her, I feel a poignant kind of happiness. This way, I've managed to secure a peaceful and wonderful life for myself. I plan to continue living with gratitude and cherishing those around me.